So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about things technical. And what I'm going to share with you today is I'd like to share with you kind of my top tips in using Adobe Lightroom to improve your photography. So this is not a tutorial on everything on how to use Lightroom. It's a random collection, it's carefully selected random collection of tips for using Lightroom that will make your life easier and hopefully make your photographs better. And that's what I'd like to do today with you. So if you have questions, put them in the chat window and I'd be happy to address them when we finish. So let me do a screen share with you and let's get this rolling. So bear with me for just a moment. Okay. So what I would like to start with, by the way, these are some of your photographs that you have shared with us. And we're going to talk about many of these the next time in our review. But the ones that I'm going to present today aren't necessarily photographs. We're going to talk about Lightroom itself. So this is a session called Lightroom Classic Tips. It's not because the tips are classic, it's because we're using Lightroom Classic as opposed to standard Lightroom, which is the sort of store your photos in the cloud tool. And I encourage everybody to use Lightroom Classic as your tool for managing your photographs. And it gives you a choice as to where to store your photographs, including locally on your own hard drives. So I prefer the Lightroom Classic over the program that's just called Lightroom. So today I'm going to cover these 14 tips, and we're recording the session. So if you don't catch every one of them, we're going to make this section available as a mini webinar that you'll be able to come back to the LHSA.org website and take a look at. So don't feel like you have to take a lot of careful notes on this. It's something that we can refer to later. So I'm going to go through these one-on-one and show you what we're talking about. My first tip is called solo mode. Now, solo mode has to do with how you use the develop part of Lightroom. So if we go back to all photographs and I share one of these photos, for example, let's say this one. When I go to develop that photograph, I click on the develop module at the top of the screen, and it brings up these panels on the side of the screen. Now, sometimes many of these panels are open and we have to scroll and scroll and scroll to get to the kinds of controls we want for editing our photographs. Well, instead of scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, if you right-click on the little triangle that opens and closes these, there is a mode that you can enter called solo mode. And solo mode means that only one of these panels will be open at any particular time. So if I open the tone curve panel, it will automatically close the basic panel and all the other panels that we have. So it's a way to simplify the way you're using the program. If I want to open the detail panel and take care of noise or sharpening, I can do that. If I want to go back to the basic panel, I'll just open that and it automatically closes the others. So that's a way to simplify some of your work. It's called solo mode, and it's my first tip of the day. The second tip I'd like to share with you is my on-off tip. And that's again for editing photographs. So if I go back to the develop module and I make some edit in the program in any one of these panels, let's say I change the, let's say I go to the transform panel and I change the vertical alignment of this. If I want to see what it looks like before and after that change, that particular change in this panel, there's a small switch that appears in the upper left of each of these panels. It's the on-off switch. So I can turn off that particular panel change and turn it back on and see what effect it has on my image. So that's my on-off tip for you. You may have overlooked it in the past, but that's the on-off switch for changes you make in each panel. Unfortunately, in the basic panel, there is no on-off switch. The basic adjustments you make, you can't turn on or off, but I will relate this to another tip right now, which is the before and after tip. And if we make a change in our photograph, any changes in the photograph, let's say we change the exposure. If I want to see the before and after, I hold down the / key, which is the key just above the return key on your keyboard, or the enter key. If I hold down the / key, it shows before. And that's before any changes were made to the image. And if I let go, it goes to the current state of editing. Okay, it's a better way to see what you're doing than hitting the reset button, because the reset button will actually get rid of all the changes you've made, and you'll have to go back and redo them manually. So before and after, once again, is the / key, which is right above the return key on your keyboard on the right-hand side. So that's my before and after. By the way, I zeroed out that exposure change by double-clicking the word exposure. If you double-click any of the words, it zeroes them out. It's a very fast way of doing that. That's a bonus tip. It's not here on the 14. Okay, my next tip is flagging. So many of us take a lot of photographs. In this, we're going to be reviewing 170 photographs from the spring shoot submittals. And if we have a whole bunch of photographs and we want to decide which photographs are worthy of future work, the easiest way to do that is to set a little white flag in the corner of the image, and that flags the image. Now, the shortcut for that is P for pick. The letter P is in Peter for pick. If you want to undo it, you can either click the flag or you can U for unpick. I know it's a little confusing. P is pick, U is unpick. When you have picked images, let's say we put the pick back on this image and we put a pick on that one and a pick on this one. We want to go back later on and see which images we picked for later work. The flag is the right way to do that, and you can look at the attributes of these images and select just the flagged images if you click attribute and flag. Now I have a related hint for you or tip for you, which is you don't have to do this every time. If you set up what's called a smart collection over here on the right-hand side, collections are ways to organize your photos. You can choose to establish a smart collection and I call this flagged images. A smart collection is based on rules. And so if I look at the flagged collection, there are my 6 photos that I've flagged. And that's a list that's automatically updated because it's smart every time that you're flagging new photos. So it doesn't require extra work. The way to set that up is, if I just do it from scratch, if I click the plus sign over here and create a smart collection, I can name it anything I like. So flagged 2, for example. And then I can set any criterion that I want or set of criteria. In this case, I said pick flag is flagged. And if I create that, now there's an automatic flag 2 with 6 images in it because those are the flagged images. If I go back and select the images that I want to unflag, I select those images and U for remove that flag, U for unflag. Okay, so that is the flagging and the smart collections flag. So flagging the images and then choosing a smart collection that keeps track of those flagged images. My next tip has to do with how you store your photos. And this is a challenge for a lot of people. We have photos spread across multiple drives, new photos coming in from cards all the time. The easiest, simplest way to use Photoshop Classic, Lightroom Classic, is literally to store all of your photographs in one folder. I use an external drive. I got a new big external drive for about $200, and I set up one folder of photographs and I put all my photos in that folder. I don't have to spend any time organizing that folder because all the organizing is going to happen here in Lightroom in the collections feature. So any organizing I want to do, I do over here in collections. I just set up new collections for landscapes and portraits and pictures of my family and pet photographs, and whatever I'm doing, I set up a collection for it. And I don't have to care where those photographs are stored or what folders they're in. Any of that is, in my mind, wasted time. So if you have all your photographs in one folder and you do your organizing here in Lightroom Classic, you can rest assured that those photographs are still there. And when it comes time to backing up your images, all you have to do is back up that one folder or back up that drive, and you don't have to go searching for all your photographs. So that's my one folder tip. My next tip is called soft proofing, and this is a function that has to do with printing. And if you tune in 2 weeks from now, on the last Wednesday of the month, Alan Weinschel, our past president, and I are going to do a webinar for all of you talking about printing demystified. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how you print on Canon and Epson printers from Lightroom and Photoshop, and what the dialog boxes look like and how you make the right choices in those dialog boxes. So that can be a challenge for a lot of people. Soft proofing has to do with getting the right colors. And this is something I'll go over in the webinar, but I want to touch on here as well. So let's go back to one of the photographs, and let's go into develop. And if we look in our develop screen, one of the things you'll see immediately under the photograph is this box for soft proofing. What soft proofing means is I want to see the photo as it's going to appear when I print it. So when I click on soft proofing, something changes up here in the upper right of Lightroom. And what changes is it's going to ask me how I'm going to print this. So I can choose a paper. For example, how is it going to appear if I go print it on my Canon Pro 1000 on semi-gloss paper? How is it going to appear different from, let's say, a glossy 2 paper? Or if I send it out to White House Color on their metallic paper, what's it going to look like on metallic paper? And you can see it's sort of dulled out a little bit here. So if we create a proof copy with that profile, we can compare that proof copy with the original image, and we can make adjustments to the color that closely match the original based on the profile that we have. And we can zoom in and out as well. So the changes you make on this side to make it look more like the left side after you've chosen your paper profile, so that it's going to simulate what it looks like on paper, on the print after you print it. So that's soft proofing. We'll go into more of that, as I said, in the webinar that we're doing in a couple of weeks. Okay, spot removal. I know this is a challenge for a lot of people. How do I get the spots off my photos? Where did they come from, and what's the easiest way to get rid of them? Well, we all have a challenge with spots occasionally on the lens or even on the sensor itself, and dust removal on the sensor. So this is a photograph that's got quite a bit of spotting going on. It's got so many spots on it that I can't really even see them all. Normally, we'd go to develop, and we would look at this and go to our spot removal tool, which is the second tool, the one right after the crop tool. We would use the spot removal tool, and we would find the spots and click one by one on all the spots. Well, Lightroom has given us a shortcut that makes it a lot easier. At the bottom center of the screen, now it says visualize spots. This only appears after you choose your spot removal tool. With visualize spots turned on, the photo will look quite strange. And when you slide this slider around, it will go from black to sort of this snowy color. Well, if you get it somewhere in between, what you're going to see is these donut-shaped empty circles. And those are dust spots on the sensor. So if we go in and in this mode, easily find these dust spots, we can get rid of them in this mode. And this, if I did all of them, it would take me probably 60 seconds to get rid of these. And once I've gotten the major ones out of the way, let's just finish a few more. Just a couple more. Those are the major ones. Oh, we got some up here in the corner. So, about a minute to do that. Got one here, got one here. And when we're satisfied with that, you can turn off, you can say done at this point, or you can turn off visualize spots. And when you say done, we've now spotted our image. Much easier than just trying to hunt around in the color image for spots. So that's the visualize spot tool that comes in really handy. It's spot removal. The next shortcut or tip I'd like to share with you are the option sliders. So in editing a photo, if we go back to some of the photos that I've added here, if we choose a photograph, let's say this one, these are port wine grapes in the Douro River Valley in Portugal. The exposure is not quite right here. I think it's a little underexposed. If we go to the develop panel, we can start sliding our sliders around and change the exposure and do whatever we feel like we ought to be doing to the image. But how do we know when we have pure whites and pure blacks in the image? You can use the whites and blacks slider, but you really don't know what the limits are. If you hold down the Option key on the Mac, I believe it's the Control key on Windows, hold down the Option key while you use these sliders. We're going to move the whites over. If we move them all the way over, you'll see that's completely blown. The colors represent the three color channels, red, green, and blue. So if we want just some specular highlights in this image, just a few, we can move that white slider to about this position and let go. And now we're guaranteed we've got just the specular highlights right there. The blacks work the same way. If I hold down the Option key, when the areas in the image go to pure black, that's what you'll see is pure black. And we want some pure black in the image, especially down here in the grapes. So I'll just make a small adjustment there. And right there, we've done one set of edits to the image, and we've got our tonal range where it ought to be. So again, this is the option slider. Hold down the Option key on the Mac while you slide the whites and the blacks. It doesn't work as well for highlights and shadows, but certainly for whites and blacks. So that's the option slider shortcut for you, or tip for you. Another tip that I often share with my students is selective sharpening. So selective sharpening is a really powerful way to use sharpening in Lightroom. And it's something that's overlooked quite often, I think. If we go back to the photos, and let's go back to one of mine. Let's say we want to do some sharpening on an image, perhaps on this image. But ideally, we'd like to sharpen the edges of this raincoat and maybe some of this grass, but there's no reason we should be sharpening the water or the sky. I mean, after all, we paid a lot of money for our Leica lenses that shoot perfectly wide open. So why would we want to sharpen those areas? Well, you could set up a mask to do that manually, but that's a lot of work. Fortunately, Lightroom does something much more powerful and easy for us. So if we go to the detail panel where we do our sharpening, there's always a default amount of sharpening. Let's say it's 25 dialed into Lightroom. This masking tool is often overlooked. And if you have any amount of sharpening in the image, if you hold down the magic option key, okay, that's the same option key on the keyboard that we did for option sliders, hold down the option key and slide the mask all the way over to the right-hand side. And what you'll see is any areas that appear in white are going to receive sharpening, and any areas that are in black will not receive any sharpening. So in this image, I would slide it almost all the way over because I just want sharpening on the grass and the raincoat. And then I can release the option key and start to add in lots of sharpening without sharpening the sky or anything I don't want to sharpen. So if we look at this, by the way, you should always sharpen at 100% zoom. So if we look at this image, we can start adding sharpening to it, and it's only sharpening the edges. You can see the edges here. That's too much sharpening, actually, so we don't want to get it looking too artificial. But if I don't use masking, it's going to sharpen everything. Look what happens to the background here. If I do use the masking, like I had it set, it's going to preserve the detail in the masking in the edges that we want to sharpen, and it's going to leave the rest alone. So that option key allows you to slide this around and decide what gets sharpened and what doesn't get sharpened. So that's my tip for you on selective sharpening. All right, we're going to keep going. Map dragging. This has to do with the map function of Lightroom Classic. So after develop, there's this map. Now map actually places photographs on a map that's generated by Google Maps. It's a global map. And if you have been shooting with a camera that records your GPS location as part of the metadata, it's going to place flags on this map according to where those images were photographed. But sometimes we shoot with cameras that don't automatically add GPS data. So we have to potentially do that manually. And we can do that. If I bring up the film strip, let me zoom out just a little bit here. I live in Seattle, so I'm going to zoom in on this area. If I bring up the film strip of photographs, and I go back to all my photos, let's say this photograph I know was taken in Portland. I can pick up this photograph from the film strip at the bottom, and I can place it on the map in Portland. And that will add, and you can do it as an extremely detailed view. You can get it down to the building level. So this is a quick way, if you've done a whole shoot one day in New Orleans and your camera doesn't record GPS information, you can pick up all the photographs that you've taken that day on the film strip and drop them into the map of New Orleans. And then it's a good place to go to find your photographs in the future. So that's dragging and dropping photographs onto the map. And in fact, I have to thank my fellow board member, Bill Royce, who told us about this function on our last webinar. So thank you, Bill, for the map drag function. Give credit where credit is due. Okay, moving right along, sync processing. So Lightroom has a way for us to apply changes that we make to one image, apply to multiple images. If we go back to these photographs, and for several years I was a professional sports photographer, and my sport was indoor lacrosse, professional NLL lacrosse, which was an indoor sport and lit with artificial lighting. And I would go and shoot a game, and a game for me was on average about 3,000 images. And it was my job when the game was over to pick 10 hero images from that game and get them up on the website the same night that the game was played. So that was a challenge. So I needed fast ways to work. So I would use the sync function to help me do editing on these images. So if I know that I've taken a series of images in the same location, under the same lighting conditions, and we're going to pretend for just a moment that this photograph, which I took in White Sands, New Mexico, and this photograph, which I took in Iceland during the winter, I'm just for the moment going to pretend that I took them in under the same lighting conditions. Obviously, you do that for a single shoot. But in editing this photo, I would go to the Develop module, and I would go to the Basic panel and choose my white balance. And this sand is really white. So I would pick up the eyedropper and come over to an area that's not directly in sun, but probably in the shadow area. And I would click once and I would get a white balance for this image. I could also, for example, increase the exposure. And that's very much the way the sand looks in White Sands, New Mexico. Well, if I have done a bunch of changes to this, including white balance, and I want to apply those changes to other images, let's say this photograph that I took outside of Reykjavik, I can very easily select that photo as well, holding down Command on the Mac, and choose this sync button in the lower right corner. The sync button starts out with a bunch of things checked. I usually say check none, so I can get a fresh start. But in this case, what I want to do is I definitely want to synchronize the white balance and the exposure change that I made. And if I selected the other 2,000 photographs that I took in Reykjavik that day under the same lighting conditions, these changes would apply, and all I have to do is hit synchronize. And now, lo and behold, it has changed that photograph, and I can see the before and the after. Remember, with our backslash tip, I can change the before and the after, and that's my after, and it's already done the white balance and the exposure change for me, and that's using the sync command here. So hopefully that's something that will be useful to everybody. It's a real time saver. So remember the sync processing. We already talked about before and after with the backslash key. Two more tips for you, and these have to do with some plugins and other applications that I find to be incredibly useful. One of the functions that Lightroom performs is it allows you to upload images to email. Unfortunately, I believe it's not very well executed in the application. It's a little too hard. It's an unfamiliar interface. So there is a plugin that has been created called Photo Upload. And Photo Upload actually supports a lot of programs, not just Gmail. And I want to show you just briefly what that looks like. If I go to Photo Export, one of the choices that is added to the list when you purchase Photo Upload makes the interface look like this. So if you want to do this for Gmail, you can see, by the way, in this list, it supports Blogger, Box, Amazon Drive, Dropbox, Flickr, blah, blah, blah. So it supports all of these. You just have to get a license key for the programs you like. So I sign into my email and I give it the password, and then I can automatically create exports in the way that I want. So I have some presets I made, 1200 pixels on the long side, sRGB up to Gmail, or 1200 pixels and add my watermark up to Gmail, or the original size in a JPEG form up to email. And all I have to do is click on one of those and choose export, and it opens my email program, if that's my browser or another email program. It's already composed a message, the attachment's already on it, and all I have to say is name the person that it's going to, or the people it's going to, and hit send. It's a real time saver. It's called Photo Upload, and you can find it on the web. I believe it's a minimal cost, and something I use quite a bit, actually. So I recommend Photo Upload for Gmail. The next thing I'd like to recommend is that if you're making books, which I encourage you to do, and we're going to do with your photographs, we're going to make a magazine that everybody gets a copy of. You can use the print module of Lightroom, and whatever photographs you've got, you can lay out in a print. I'm sorry, you can use the book module. Pardon that. You can use the book module to create a layout for a book, and choose the photographs you want and put them in the book and assemble it in Lightroom and then send the book to Blurb. That's something I've done quite a bit, but Blurb has a native tool built in called Bookwrite that makes this a lot easier. And unfortunately, we don't have time to do a demo today of Bookwrite, but it's a free download from Blurb. And it's a wonderful tool that includes a lot of templates that allow you to create a really professional looking book along with text and captions and anything else you might want. You can create books or magazines or other printed forms using Bookwrite. It's free from Blurb, the tool is. You're just paying for the printing of the books. So my final tip of today is using Bookwrite for Blurb. So there we go, 14 plus 1 tips on using Lightroom smarter, easier, faster. And at this point, I want to come back and open it up for questions and see if I can address any questions that you may have. So let me look through the list, and yeah, it doesn't look like there have been a lot of questions here. So Bill, thank you, points out that the Option key on the Mac is the Alt key on the PC. There's Chats pointed out that Geotag Photos 2 is a really great way of geotagging your pictures in Lightroom as well. So there's a plugin for doing that if you don't want to drop and drag on the map. Maggie, thank you for this. How do I remember all these tips? I use the program many times a week, and I teach it. And so, as you know, in teaching photography, the best way to learn something is to get good enough that you can teach it and teach it and teach it. So that's the only way to remember all this stuff. I had a question: what percentage of my work requires Photoshop? That is, leaving Lightroom and going out to Photoshop. I would say probably less than 5% of my work requires a trip out to Photoshop and then back to Lightroom. The scenarios under which I go to Photoshop have to do with, number one, adding text to an image. If I want to create a poster or I want to create something that might deserve to have text on the image, Lightroom doesn't give you a way to do that. You need to go to Photoshop for that. The other time that I go out to Photoshop is when you want to do pixel pushing, is what I call it. Now, pixel pushing is where you want to remove very specific tiny elements in the photograph that might be distracting. So you might want to remove a power line that goes across a photograph, or you might want to just make a very tiny pixel change. It's easier to do in Photoshop than it is in Lightroom. And then finally, there are some filters available in Lightroom, in Photoshop, that are not available in Lightroom. And there are some smart filters as well, especially content-aware fill is something that if you've got edges of a photograph that you need to fill in missing space, content-aware fill is a very powerful tool in Photoshop that is not available at this time in Lightroom. Bill points out that spot removal, by the way, that I showed you with that spot removal tool at the bottom center, you can synchronize that across multiple images. So as long as you believe that the photographs were taken with the camera in the same state, and that you haven't cleaned the sensor in between, you can pretty much assume that the spots on one photograph are going to appear on all of those photographs. So you can do your spot removal and then synchronize spot removal across all of your images. Just be careful, because that spot removal is not aware of the content in your image. So one of the spots might be in a very critical place, let's say on someone's eye in the photograph. So you want to make sure that you're not just doing it blindly and letting that go. You want to review the photographs after you've done the synchronization of spot removal. Let's see. I don't want to miss any of these. How do you mark a group of images for map drag? On the Macintosh, you hold down the Command key and select individually which image you want, and take those images and drag them up to the map. Another one, is there a tool or software for Microsoft Outlook like photo upload for Gmail? I don't think Outlook was on the list, and I'm not aware of one, but it's a good question, and perhaps we can do some research and find out. Eileen asks, when is this section going to be on the website? In a couple of days. We'll take this recording and separate it out and make it like a webinar, and we'll get there up on a couple of days. Let's see. Before and after, when using before and after on my Mac, purchased this year, it's painfully slow. What settings am I missing? It is possible that you're beginning to run out of disk space, or that maybe you don't have enough RAM in the machine. Lightroom likes to use as much RAM as you've got, and so you can speed things up with that. Also, make sure that the previews that you've built are standard size previews, not the thumbnail size. So go back and look at your previews and make sure that you're building standard size previews. That'll speed things up. Recommendations for bringing all images into Lightroom, and do I keep my images on external drives? Yes, I do. It makes it easier for me to back up, and I know that I'm never going to fill up my boot drive with images. So I keep them on an external drive, and then I back up that external drive to another external drive. And then, just to be on the extra safe side, I do a third backup. I take that drive and I move it out of my office into another location in case there's a catastrophic fire and all my computers and disks burn to the ground. I still have another backup. So that's how I manage it, and I bring images into Lightroom from the SD cards on the camera using Lightroom. I use the import function of Lightroom. I don't make copies out in the file system. I let Lightroom import my images from SD cards. I just tell it, put the images on the external drive. David was kind enough to put the link to photo upload for Gmail in the chat. Thank you for that. Chat's also recommended that if your performance is a little bit slow, you might want to optimize the catalog, and that's something that's available in the file menu. Usually it's optimized when you exit if you allow it to do the backup, but you can trigger an optimization of the catalog from that menu. It doesn't take that long for most catalogs. If you're running, Keith, thank you for your tip. By the way, if you're running one of the new Macintosh computers that's based on Apple Silicon, that's the M1 chip. If you're running one of those computers, make sure you have the latest version of Lightroom installed, because they're optimized for the M1 chip and they're lightning fast. So if you have a chance to upgrade to an M1 based Mac, use the latest version of Lightroom. I always recommend using the latest version, but you'll see significant performance improvements. Keith asks, does soft proofing work for black and white? And the answer is absolutely yes. Especially in black and white, if your paper choice is a matte paper, this can be a really challenging paper to get deep blacks printed. So soft proofing, choosing that matte paper, will simulate the look as it comes out of the printer, and then you can make adjustments to make it look the way you want it to look using soft proofing. So I always recommend, if you're doing your own prints or you're sending prints out to be made, and the company that's doing those prints for you offers ICC color profiles, load those color profiles, use soft proofing. And we'll cover this again when Alan Weinschel and I are going to do our webinar for you in 2 weeks on demystifying printing. Eileen points out, by the way, rumors have it that Apple is hard at work on their M2 chip or whatever is going to come after M1. So life is just going to get better for all of us. So keep an eye out for that as well. Chat says M2 and a MacBook Pro. He's signed up for that. It's not been announced yet. We don't have any inside information, but rumors are spreading that there's going to be a big MacBook Pro with an M2 chip in it, and it's going to further empty our wallets of the money that we otherwise would have spent on Leica equipment. So that is also Mac Mini Pro is another rumor that's coming out. So life is good. It's a good time to be a Leica photographer. It's a great time to be a member of the International Leica Society. If you enjoyed my presentation on Lightroom tips, we have a whole library of these webinars, each one about an hour long, that cover different aspects of Lightroom. They are a benefit for free for your membership. And we're happy to do them, and we're going to keep doing them. And we're going to cover a whole bunch of different topics. So with that, that is going to be our program for today. I'm going to invite Keith to come back and give us some closing remarks. But if you enjoyed today's program, and I'm so glad you were all with us. This is a record number of attendance, by the way, for us for our spring shoot. I thought today was fantastic. The speakers were just amazing, and it's a great way to share information, share and learn from each other. We are the largest Leica user community in the world. We have direct support from our friends at Leica North America and from our friends at Leica AG and from Leica Akademie. And it's just a wonderful family to be part of. And if you enjoy being a part of this family, I'd like you to consider upgrading your membership to a charter, to a sustaining membership. And we've got some gifts for you and some privileges that you're going to get as a sustaining member. So thank you all. And I'm going to hand it back to Keith now, who will say a few words before we sign off for the day.
All right. Well, the only thing I have for everyone is to make sure that you remember tomorrow, same place, same different link, same place, different link, same time. So 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, 11:30 Eastern tomorrow. We'll have 2 more door prizes to give away. And I want to personally thank the 2 people who have already signed up for sustaining memberships while we've been online today. We very much appreciate that, and continue encouraging anyone who wants to do that to join the sustaining member group. And other than that, I hope you enjoyed today, and we will be back tomorrow morning.
Great. And check your email for the link for tomorrow. It was sent to you at least a couple of times on the Zoom link for tomorrow. And Richard, any closing remarks for the day?
Thank you, Brad. Just thank you, and thanks to everyone for being here. I will send a link for tomorrow in case you forgot to do that. So look for that in your email, and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Great. Everybody have a lovely rest of your day or evening or night or morning, wherever you might be.
A question there from John, I believe, John Maddox.
So I see a question, will tomorrow's program be recorded? It will be recorded. We haven't decided quite yet how to, what to do with those recordings. They're not intended they have never been intended for general consumption right after the meeting. But we'll figure out good things to do with the recording so that you don't have to miss everything. So we'll work on that for you.
Maddox had no question. Maddox was just saying goodbye.
Fantastic. John, thank you. Appreciate your time. And yeah, everybody join us when you can. Tomorrow we're going to hear from my dear friend Sandra Eisert, White House photo editor under 3 U.S. presidents. And we're going to hear from Anna Maria Gosen, who's our philanthropy winner of the year in 2020, and we're going to have your photographs that you so kindly shared with us on display tomorrow, and we're going to hear comments on many of those photographs from Sandra Iser and from David, who we heard from this morning. So thanks again. Enjoy. Be
Thank you.
safe.
Take care.
See you tomorrow.